Happiness to me is like looking at a full moon. It's there, floating in the sky, so big and so bright. You feel like you can just reach out and grab it, but you also know that it's 384,000 kilometers away. You can try to close the gap, but you know you won't get any closer. Does that sound familiar? I have spent much of the last 7 years trying to work out how I can reach the moon, and I bet you have too. I think it's something that everyone has experienced at one point or another during their life. And since you're watching this, then you probably are aware of the situation we're in, the so-called silent pandemic, where depression, anxiety, stress, and a chronic sense of dissatisfaction is spreading across the globe. I wanted to challenge the narrative I've been hearing for so long now, and what I found blew me away. I can't guarantee that this video will bring you happiness, but I hope by the end you'll be filled with the same sense of optimism I was. So with my curiosity tickled, I descended down the rabbit hole. Very soon after, I found the 2020 General Social Survey results for Australia. What we're looking at here is the average life satisfaction of Australians from 2014 to 2020. Do you see anything peculiar? Don't you find it surprising how high these numbers are? 7.7, 7.4, was the average in 2019 being 7.5 and 7.2 in 2020. Wait, hang on, the average life satisfaction for Australians during the first lockdown of the COVID-19 pandemic was 7.2? So yeah, we saw a decrease in happiness, but it was only by 0.3. With everything going on and the echo chamber constantly reinforcing how shit of a year 2020 has been, I would have thought more people would have been more dissatisfied. The survey does state that the number of responses in 2020 were lower, so maybe this isn't representative of how the average Australian was feeling. But still, I was shocked, and I thought it deserved further investigation. Don't you think? So I looked at Australia's happiness score in the 2021 World Happiness Report. The findings are pretty consistent to those found in the ABS. The average response from 2017 to 2019 was 7.223, and the response in 2020 was 7.137. I expected a much larger decrease in life satisfaction, but I think Australia was relatively unscathed by the pandemic. So let's look at countries devastated by COVID-19. The USA, satisfaction increased by 0.088 from 2019 to 2020. Brazil decreased by 0.266. India increased by 0.652. Russia decreased by 0.006. Mexico decreased by 0.501. Of course, there was a 1 year gap from when this data was collected till now. But I'm sure I'm not wrongfully remembering that the last 2 years have been disastrous on a global scale. Yet from the World Happiness Report, it appears that most people's well-being was not drastically affected, despite the actual events that unfolded. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I feel like there's something about happiness that we're missing here, and it makes me believe that maybe we're not trying to get to the moon after all. Is there anything more dangerous than dissatisfied gods who do not know what they want? Is a quote that comes to mind as I reflect on the history of humankind. I mean, look at all the philosophies and religions that humans have burned through, each with their own sets of values and ideologies, in an attempt to maximize the satisfaction we may get from the limited time we have. For example, Stoicism believes that negative emotions serve no purpose and should be avoided. Hedonism believes in pursuing external pleasures, while cynicism believes that the path to a meaningful existence is choosing to live in poverty. I am not interested in arguing if one philosophy of life is better than any other. What I'm more interested in is highlighting that nothing has changed. Modern religions, political institutions, and different factions of the personal development space all have their own philosophical code, and all directly or indirectly are trying to preach their own path to happiness. Today we have philosophies like Ikigai, books like 12 Rules for Life, and so many self-proclaimed happiness experts making videos. Just look at how many ways you can ruin your life. To be clear, I have nothing against any of these by themselves, but collectively they create the expectation that if I just tick these boxes, then I'll be happy. Then I'll be satisfied. If only, right? But don't you think that it's too much? Too much information, too much pressure to be happy? I do. And with so many voices, so many ideas that have been rippled throughout our entire history, It has become clear, at least to me, that all of these ideas are just that. Ideas. Nothing more. Nothing less. But I get it. These ideas, they provide guidance and direction. Unfortunately though, many people fall victim to predatory self-help gurus, multi-level marketing schemes, mega churches, and other deceptive people or institutions peddling the promise of a better tomorrow. And that's it, right? A promise for a better tomorrow? I genuinely believe that the present is a product of humans trying to solve problems for each other. But I no longer think that happiness has ever been one of those problems. How could they? It's hard enough to decide what to eat for dinner, let alone work out what will make us happy. You may be interested to know that researchers have not reached a definitive consensus of what happiness is. Some think it's a sense of meaning or purpose. Others think it's overall life satisfaction and contentment, while others believe it is experiencing joy on a daily basis. It might be all of these things, but I particularly like thinking about happiness as more of a general state of well-being. For example, if joy is like having a sunny day, then happiness is having a typically sun-filled climate. There's an Australian company called the Resilience Project, which focuses on trying to help people live happier lives through the practice of 3 principles. The founder, Hugh van Cuylenburg, stumbled across these principles while he was volunteering as a teacher at a remote village situated in the middle of a high-altitude desert plain in the Ladakh region of northern India. To put it lightly, the village was poor. They lacked many of the facilities and infrastructure that you and I would normally take for granted, like running water, flushing toilets, and power. Yet Hugh found himself in front of some of the most happiest people he had the privilege of meeting. And he began to wonder, why were we in the developed world so broken? Why were we in Australia, such a beautiful and privileged country, so anxious and so depressed? It's a question worth asking, and he concluded that the happiness he has witnessed was the result of gratitude, empathy, and mindfulness, which I agree with, but let's not kid ourselves. People in developing nations do not want to be poor. They want to have a nice home with a comfortable bed, running water, a complete kitchen stocked full of food and air conditioning. They want to have access to high quality education and healthcare. They want to be able to jump into their cars and travel conveniently. We have to think about people living in these regions of Earth as being happier than those in the developed world. But according to the World Happiness Report, that just isn't the case. In the top 40 happiest countries in the world, only one country is classified as a developing nation, and that country is Taiwan. This data shows us that people in wealthy countries are on average happier than people in poorer countries. But don't be mistaken, wealth and happiness are not proportional. Take Finland for example. They have a GDP of $271.2 billion US dollars, compared to $20.94 trillion US dollars for America. The US has a GDP of 100 times larger than Finland, yet Finland is the happiest country in the world and the USA is 14th. So you may be thinking, what makes Finland so happy? Well, I could make an entire video on that, but in a nutshell, it's because they feel safe and secure. Finland has strong financial and social support from the government, very little perceived corruption, low crime rates, and each individual feels like they have a huge amount of freedom to make their own decisions. So I don't think that it's the country's wealth that determines the happiness of its people. It's how a country decides to use its wealth to ensure that its people feel safe and secure. But here's the real kicker.
One of the biggest epidemics right now is stress. You both have to work, but you also have to take care of your family. You also have to be social with your friends. You also have to, do this self-realization thing, hobbies and traveling. And there's so much you have to do in the same amount of hours.
And so I think we're finally getting to the heart of the happiness problem. It's a problem of expectation. Perhaps this is why he was wondering why these villagers seemed to be so happy when the people back home were not. The villagers were just living their lives, trying to do the best they could. In contrast, in Australia and other developed countries, people are expected to be happy. You expect to find happiness in your life, whether through work, achievement, purchases, or something else. And if you are not happy, then there is something wrong with you. It's complete bullshit. There's nothing wrong with you. Being a human is hard and people are complicated. It's normal to feel emotions beside happiness or joy, and I think evolution has some explaining to do. As far as scientific principles go, evolution is one of my favorites, because there are generally reasons why we have evolved into what we are. For example, when you bring back food to the tribe, you feel good. You contribute to their survival in a very significant way. This good feeling could be joy, pride, gratitude, but that doesn't really matter. What matters is that this emotion is your brain rewarding you for doing something good, so you're more likely to continue doing it. In contrast, if you fail to bring food back, you probably feel bad, embarrassed, ashamed, angry. Again, it doesn't really matter what the emotion is, as long as it motivates you to take action. Of course, emotions are more complicated than this, but in a nutshell, bad feelings provide motivation to solve problems, and good feelings reward you for solving that problem. Evolution doesn't care if we're happy or not, it just wants us to live long enough to reproduce. And the more problems we solve, the greater chances of that happening. Let's say, for example, the tribe moves to a more food abundant area where foraging and fishing is easy. This eliminates a major stress and the entire tribe experiences an increase in well-being. But how long before they turn their attention to the poorly designed huts? After the huts are fixed, a new problem is found and solved, and so on and so on. This is known as a hedonic treadmill, and it's why we are never happy, because every time we solve a problem, we adapt and look for another problem to solve. Now you understand why people who achieve everything they dream of normally falls into a depression. Will Smith becomes the biggest movie star in the world, not happy. Andre Agassi becomes the best tennis player in the world, not happy. The rapper NF literally included a track in his album just to say, "I've literally had everything I ever dreamed of happening, and I didn't feel happy at all. There's got to be more for me, because if this is it, it's not going to work." In many cases, these people may have neglected other aspects of their lives that bring a genuine sense of fulfillment. But I think the core issue for the rest of us is unrealistic expectations. I think we expect that once our dreams come true, we are done. There's no more adversity, no more problems. It's happily ever after. And it can be a real slap in the face when we learn that that is not the case. Then when you realize that you were a 7 out of 10 before you started, and now that you achieved what you wanted, you're still a 7 out of 10, what's the point? That's the reality of being human. It doesn't matter what you do, you will always adapt and you will always find more problems to solve. We did not evolve to be happy, our evolution made us resilient. Some researchers believe that your happiness is made up by 50% your genes, 10% your circumstances, and 40% your choices. There is no doubt that each of these play a role in a person's happiness, but to what exact percentages are completely debatable. For example, tell someone living under constant threat of terrorism in Afghanistan that only 10% of your unhappiness is caused by your circumstances. The rest is your fault. That's absurd. Even more, something I hear quite often is that happiness is a choice. Certainly, you can choose not to compare yourself to others on social media. You can choose to look after yourself by eating well, exercising, and getting plenty of sleep. You can choose to have more compassion for yourself, and you can choose the people you surround yourself with. But it's more complicated than this, because people don't choose to get raped or assaulted. People don't choose to be discriminated against. People don't choose to develop a mental illness like eating disorders or depression. People don't choose to lose someone close to them. People don't choose to have their country invaded by another. People don't choose a lot of the really shitty things that happen to them. But all these things have a significant impact on someone's sense of well-being. That's normal. There would be something wrong if it didn't. But here's the thing, whatever storm you find yourself in, if you find a safe place and survive long enough, the storm will pass. There's plenty of data to show that people's well-being return to a baseline after a loss in the same way they return to the baseline after a win. Except generally, you're more grateful when you return from a loss. When I look at countries like Finland, a country known for its safety, security, and freedom, the happiness of its people averages out to be 7.8. Consider what this means for a moment. If we can eliminate the major external stresses, people will naturally develop a baseline of above 7. Don't you think that's amazing? 7 is a long way away from 0, but pretty close to 10. And all you need to do is make the struggles of life easier. We don't need the money, the fame, the mansion, the cars, the boats, and all the other external pleasures that people pursue to find happiness. Because most people living in developed countries are already there. They already have a satisfaction level of 7 or above. But there's still the most important factor to a person's happiness I have not talked about yet. Back when humans were hunter-gatherers, all they really had was each other. When someone from the tribe lost a child to a hungry tiger and fell into a depression, I cannot imagine the tribe would have outcasted the grieving parent. Instead, the tribe would rally behind the parent and support them through the storm. Not only would this person feel safe and secure, it would also strengthen the relations they had with their family and friends. The problem that exists today is that people are feeling less connected to each other. So when your well-being deviates from the baseline up or down, you feel like you have no one to share the joy or pain with. And that can be a lonely feeling. Loneliness often results into a feeling of anxiety because a lonely hunter-gatherer would be less safe and less secure, often resulting in death. Instead of making these high-quality relationships, people today double down on pursuing happiness from external sources. Why? Well, because it's easier. It's easier to prove yourself to the world than to accept yourself. It's easier to seek external pleasures than to face your insecurities and demons. It's easier to pretend on Instagram that you have all your shit together than to be vulnerable with a friend. It's easier to continue working on a YouTube video than it is to take the initiative to hang out with a friend. It's easier to build wealth than it is to build connections with others. All of these things you are told to pursue are not strength, they're weaknesses. It takes a good amount of resilience and strength to realize that you need help and then go out and get it. And as you have seen, you have evolved to be resilient. Happiness is a complicated thing because being a human is hard. But I want to make this video because I don't think the way we think or talk about happiness is particularly useful. We often think that happiness is something that we pursue and then eventually reach. It's not. It's never been that way. Humans' focus has always been on finding solutions to problems. Besides, how could we pursue happiness if our baseline is already so high? I think we have this expectation that eventually if we achieve enough, then we'll become so full that we'll never feel bad ever again. That sounds ridiculous, right? How you feel on a day-to-day basis is going to change. That's normal. What's more important is where your baseline is. And if you practice gratitude, empathy, and mindfulness, you may realize that your baseline is higher than what you once thought. But if your baseline is not as high as you would like, I invite you to see a mental health professional. Believe me, it can be nice to just talk to someone. And so I'll end with this. Why try to get to the moon when you are already here on Earth? Thank you for watching to the end, guys. It really does mean a lot. My goal for this video was to provide you with another perspective on happiness. And if you have enjoyed this, then you probably like my perspective on productivity as well. But for now, I hope you have a really good day. Catch you in the next video.